Like, it's got a 10,000-year history. You know, the guy they found frozen in the ice on the Swiss border, you know, was eating cannabis, had cannabis in the little thing around his neck. So this has been, in the East, they called cannabis God's gift for centuries because it's such a useful plant. You know, fantastic fibre, fantastic seed, very rich and nutritious seed. We, like Andrew said, we were the last country to legalise cannabis seed. That's only a year before last. We've been incredibly backward in Australia. The police have a lot of control in Australia, I've realised. And I'm not a police basher. You know, I know some good cops, but no country on earth is doing saliva testing like we do. New Zealand's having a referendum in November this year on whether to legalise cannabis. That'll be really significant. Our Victorian police have just been over there to convince New Zealand police they've got to saliva test everyone. It's a shocking thing, I tell you. It has nothing to do with impaired driving. People who have regularly been using cannabis are probably going to be much safer with their medicine than without it. So there's a few big forces against the law changing. There's a lot of money in pain relief. I often think it's the biggest business on the planet. You know, if I can take your pain away, make you feel good, I've watched people sell their houses to try to get that. So the pharmaceutical industry will fight tooth and nail to stop cannabis getting legal. California got legal medical cannabis in 1996. That's a long time ago now. You know, car accidents are down, suicides are down, alcohol use is down, domestic violence is down. All the statistics are there. Obviously, lots of less people going to jail and getting locked up. Still, the Australian government basically ignores all that. It's pretty interesting. America got the laws changed because the public can have a vote. If you get 200,000 signatures, you can put a motion on the election table in California and everyone votes on it. In Australia, we have no Bill of Rights. We can't do that. It's pretty interesting. We're at the mercy of the politicians, and they are being wined and dined by the pharmaceutical industry. A little bit the alcohol industry, the church. There's a few people who really are down on stopping the war on drugs. And, you know, been in Nimbin a long time and watched a lot of people come here for pain relief with different drugs, and you know, drug use is a health issue. I just can't get past that argument. You know, people are trying to have less pain, people are trying to feel good. It's a health issue. For me, it doesn't matter what drug you're using. If we didn't make it criminal and we helped educate people and gave them good quality drugs instead of black market stuff made by organised crime who don't really care about the end result often, we'd be way ahead. But it is changing, especially on cannabis. Even the UN is saying now, you know, certainly medical cannabis, we need to change our attitude. But we're all locked in to United Nations treaties. And that's why federally in America they haven't legalised cannabis. It's only the states. But in the election later this year, it will be a topic on their agenda, cannabis law reform, because it's massive business. Colorado has already made $1 billion in tax from the cannabis they're selling. In, what's that, 5 or 6 years? So it's pretty extraordinary how popular it is. I can't emphasise enough how safe it is. There's no recorded death from anyone using cannabis in the history of it, which is pretty interesting. You can go to sleep. A psychiatrist once said to me, it's manure for your imagination. And it is in a way, and that can frighten people. You know, if you're really frightened and you get stoned, you can turn it into paranoia. Or, you know, if whatever your emotion is can get exaggerated. So our big advice for people who've never tried cannabis before is start low, go slow. You start really low, you don't ever give yourself a fright, you might totally love it, you might not like it. And you'll hear from a lot of people today, especially Dr Pot, who'll say everyone is different. And this is where it sort of beats the pharmaceutical industry. There isn't a standard dose to give everybody. We are all different. We all have an endocannabinoid system, only discovered 40 years ago. And we just all have a different reaction. I really appreciate how individual we all are. And I think, like Andrew said, you have to trust yourself. Be your own doctor. Everyone should Google their ailment and medical cannabis, and you'll find so much information it's confusing. So hopefully today people will help you be not too confused. And there's 3 doctors, all with experience in cannabis, going to be around over the weekend. There's Malcolm Lee, who's a long-time breeder and grower of cannabis and been through the courts and got himself out of it well and very open. People here will be game to talk to you about anything, so don't be shy. So first speaker is Dr Deb Waldron from Queensland. I've known Dr Deb for a while. She's been coming to these Medicans regularly, and she will juggle how some of you know lots and some of you know nothing. But I think I can say that she's been a cannabis user for a long time, as well as a doctor, and now studying herbalism. So it's been her effort to manage her own pain that's really led you along the path of learning, hasn't it? Dr Deb, I'm not saying any more. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Michael. Happy New Year, everybody. And how good is this rain? And don't throw anything at me because I just imitated the Prime Minister. It's this sort of weather today. I think, I'm actually quite surprised at the turnout. So thank you all for coming because it was pretty wet this morning. I don't think anyone is complaining. So I thought today we'd sort of take it a little bit easier. Now, first of all, I'd just like to know who here is their first time at this workshop? Oh, my God. Okay, so, we might just start at the beginning then, shall we? And those that have a bit more knowledge, well, it never hurts to have a bit of revision. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about how I came to be in this scene. Yes?
It's really hard for us to look up at you on the stage.
Okay, there we go. And actually it's probably better because I'm really bad for moving around the stage, and whoever is filming me gets really cross, so if I'm sitting down I can't move as much. So I'm Debbie Waldron. Up until several years ago I was a rural GP in Gundawindi, and I had a few life events happen that pretty much changed the course of my life completely. I was a bit of a victim of the other doctors in my town, or one doctor really, and I was reported to AHPRA, and that led to a 5-year battle with the medical board, which ended in me being deregistered for 1 week. I have no desire to be re-registered in Australia as a doctor at this point because I feel that the medical hierarchy is corrupt, and I think we're being run by a group of narcissistic sociopaths, and I really have no desire to be controlled by that system again. And I think that there's a lot of talk about, doctors prescribing cannabis and how hard it is to find a doctor and rah-rah-rah. I'd just like to go into bat for the doctors a little bit here. You need to understand how frightened they are. And it's not just cannabis. Any doctor that practices integrative medicine, holistic medicine, natural medicine, that advocates for that can become a target for the medical board. And it's become so rabid in the last 10 years or so that doctors are no longer practicing medicine to care for patients. They're practicing medicine to avoid discipline. And I think just bear that in mind. They've been threatened a lot by various hierarchies if they prescribe cannabis. Not just medical boards and hospitals, but insurance companies. Doctors are worried that their medical indemnity will be voided if they prescribe cannabis. Not that I can imagine too many people would be suing anyone for using cannabis because it's just simply too safe. But yeah, that can still happen. So just a little word, to say that, look, be kind. Be kind to the doctors of Australia because on the whole, they do try their best and they're up against a really, really rotten system. And there was a few things I think that caused the scales to fall from my eyes. I've always practiced fairly holistically, but it was when I found out about the endocannabinoid system. I had, at the same time as I was suspended for the second time by the medical board, I was actually diagnosed with secondary melanoma. So that sort of put all of that battle into the background a little bit, because the next 5 years was spent fighting for my life. And so now I've forgotten what I'm saying. And I'm not even guilty of that this morning either. I'm very good. But I must admit, it was a long drive last night. So I discovered I had secondary melanoma, and the only treatment available were a couple of what we call immunomodulators in Australia. And I mean, the diagnosis for stage 4D melanoma is quite abysmal. You know, the prognosis, I should say. I mean, basically it's sort of like you've got a 2% of chance of still being alive in 5 years' time. So I started actually researching cannabis as cancer treatment. And this is where I realised that the endocannabinoid system wasn't one phrase in a medical textbook. It was, in fact, the medical discovery of the 1980s. And why were we doctors not told about it? And that one question just blew it all open for me, because there can really only be one answer, is that there's someone else with an agenda to stop doctors from knowing about the endocannabinoid system. And I already knew about the prohibition of hemp and how that came about, and I already knew about the uses of hemp. So it all started to make more sense. And of course, as Michael said, you know, our enemy are the pharmaceutical companies. And of course, Big Corp, that doesn't want to see it take off as a superfood, doesn't want to see it take off for building and textiles, and so many other big corporations have a stake in not allowing hemp and cannabis to take their rightful place back in the world. So that's what started me on my journey to research cannabis medicine. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. When I was too sick to do anything else, I just researched and I learned how to grow herbs. And then when I got a little better, I became a cannabis activist and ran a few rallies and fronted a few rallies, and then started the education. So I've been talking here now every few months for quite a while. And of course, offering advice with cannabis medicine as far as I'm able. Being a disgraced doctor makes me blacklisted by both sides, but I find that people tend to judge you on your knowledge and your caring and all stuff like that. And I hope I have that in bucket loads. My slogan for 2020 actually is be kind. That we just all need to be kind to each other. We've got a long recovery to go, our country. So, and cannabis would make it so much easier. So that's how I got into the whole thing. And then I realised that, of course, is what's been taken away is the right to choose what medicines we put into our own bodies. And that's what we're claiming back with this fight with cannabis to get it legalised as a medicine and just, you know, as a plant. It's quite extraordinary to think that we have no rights in Australia. When we started this fight, we thought, we'll just use the human rights thing, you know. We have a right to choose our treatment. Well, no, we don't, because we have no Bill of Human Rights in Australia. So that's why we couldn't use any of those arguments, which is really sad. Okay, so... and the other thing I discovered, this is a little bit of interesting trivia for you all, is that we were always told we didn't know the mechanism of action of paracetamol. And in 2006, in fact, it was elucidated. And it's actually, the mechanism of action is via the endocannabinoid system. And then it acts upon the cyclooxygenase system, which is the anti-inflammatory system of the body. So, for 70-odd years... we've been giving our children a derivative of coal tar, which is a poison, which can wreck our liver, and ibuprofen, an anti-inflammatory, which can wreck our kidneys instead of a harmless cannabis preparation. So this is to the extent, to which we've been lied. And that was another thing I thought, this is extraordinary. And I mean, people can go, oh, no, you can't give children anything psychoactive. Well, what do you think antihistamines do? How many parents have given their children an antihistamine for the side effect of sedation? So, people can argue all they like, oh, you can't give children things that are psychoactive. Well, you already do. Any parent that's done that. I'm not judging that. We all need a good night's sleep occasionally, and an occasional dose of an antihistamine is not going to hurt a child. But neither is an occasional dose of cannabis medicine. Okay, so I thought that's just a little introduction. Now, I thought what I might do is just, you're all pretty new, so how about we just have a little bit of a question and answer session, and that can direct us then to discuss, certain elements. Rather than anything structured, you'll get lots and lots of information this weekend. But I know that if all of you are here, and most of you will have a burning question, something that you really want to know, and that's why you're here. So we might need another mic for whoever is in the audience, though. Sister, if anyone's around. Where's the other mic? Oh, here it is here. Yeah, okay, so you can sort of line up if you like. Burning questions. Burning questions come to the front. Because otherwise it's really awkward, just repeating everyone's questions all the time. It's easy if you can hear them in the first place. Okay.
It's a question to you.
Yes?
It's a question to you.
Yes.
And also to Michael. I'm interested in knowing if you recommend smoking or other means of ingesting.
Okay, so that is a good question. There are several ways that you can ingest cannabis. The usual way is by smoking, which would be joints or bongs or pipes or whatever.
I recommend that.
No, hold on.
No. I'm not asking for history. You've done that. I'm asking whether as...
yes, but we have...
Can I just say something? So the reason why people like to smoke is you feel the effect straight away. Almost straight away. It's straight into your blood. So I can stop. I might have 3 tokes, 3 puffs, and it's enough. But if I eat something, you've got to wait maybe an hour to get the effect, and it can be too much or too little. So that's the favour of smoking, but for sure, it's not as healthy. We know it's not as healthy.
Yeah, well, I sort of didn't get to that.
I think that's what we should be talking about, I think, because there's a danger in smoking anything. I remember talking to Michel Fanton, Jude Fanton from the Seed Savers, right? So we're not coming from the ultra-right, and we've got an organization for 35. Yeah, that's right.
Giving us a talk.
Yeah.
I've asked you a question.
I know, but you haven't allowed me to answer the question.
Well...
Please, you give me the mic.
So I'm going to be shut down.
No, you asked a question, I'm going to answer the question. Okay, so the question was, which is better, smoking or vaping? Now, for those in the audience that don't know a lot about it, I am going to do a little preamble before I answer the question, okay? So, the usual way and the old-fashioned way is by smoking, as Michael described. Yes, the effects are instant, as opposed to ingesting, which takes a long time. And in that respect, it's similar to vaping, because you are still inhaling it. It bypasses the liver. It goes straight into your from your lungs into your bloodstream. Okay. Now, vaping is where the cannabis is heated to a point where it turns into a vapour rather than smoke. And so by and actually vaping or vaporising cannabis is a really wonderful and interesting way of ingesting it, because they have vaporisers now, for example, that you can dial up the temperature so that you can even select what terpenes you want, because the constituents of cannabis is not just cannabinoids. You've got terpenes and flavonoids and all sorts of stuff. And when you're heating this to activate it, the terpenes also get heated, and they get heated at a lower temperature. So you can actually vaporise cannabis in order to make the most out of all of the cannabinoids that are in it, depending on the temperature that you use. So in that respect, it's actually far superior to smoking, because you can sort of control the effects that you get from it, and not necessarily the psychoactive effects, but the medical effects on your body. And of course, the big disadvantage with smoking is that you're still inhaling particulate matter. It isn't the same cancer-causing chemicals that are found in tobacco, but it is still cancer-causing elements that can be in it.
Thank you.
However, we're still not looking at something that's as dangerous as smoking cigarettes, because it's still hopefully organic, and the elements of smoke that are contained in it still have protective elements. So even though you're doing, something that's not so good by smoking, you're also still getting some of the benefits of inhaling cannabis. The CBD, for example, which is anti-inflammatory. And that's why there's studies out now to show that it actually can be effective in chronic obstructive airways disease. But you would not recommend smoking. You would always recommend vaping in that situation. So does that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's important for Michelle we say that none of the medicine we give out is in a smoking matter. It's all in an extract, a tincture or a paste. So it's obvious that smoking is an inferior way to...
Michael, did you mind me introducing myself? I did already. No, that's all right. And it wasn't just selling myself, I was explaining who we are, because many people would know the Seed Savers Network for the last 35 years. And I always had a bond from the very beginning with the people that were proposing smoking in Nimban. Some of them die of cancer. Muki and Chanto, Muki, didn't preserve them.
Tobacco, man. Smoking cannabis with tobacco is for idiots.
Yeah.
Right.
So obviously, yes, smoking cannabis with tobacco is not a good thing either. Okay, next question. Thanks, sister.
It's an important point, because young people in Australia, in America or Canada or New Zealand, no one smokes with tobacco. It's like an Australian European habit we picked up, I think, for smoking hash. So young people get introduced to smoking with tobacco here, and you very quickly can get an addiction to tobacco. So they wake up in the morning, they want another bong. It's the tobacco making them want to smoke. So I really think it's important people never smoke with tobacco. If you're going to smoke cannabis, smoke it. Yeah, well, that's your opinion, but, I don't think a little bit of smoking cannabis hurts much.
That's my question. Do you, Michael?
Sister.
Sorry, thanks for the mic.
No, we don't recommend.
I will just quickly comment on the smoking thing, that if you go to Mawinamba Hospital on your way home, pop in on the ground floor, you'll see a little receptionist there, there's a little museum, and you will see Canadonna, which is the Australian belladonna cannabis product, which was for asthma, and it was designed to be smoked in the 30s because it vasodilated the lungs. Look, I've got the unfortunate task, it's not that I want to do this, but there's two cars, a black Mitsubishi Ute with a disability sticker on it, and a white Subaru that are parked right at the front here, Subaru. 656 YFU and B1282D. If they could please just be moved back. For the disability, we can always come back and, to enable access, but it's just blocking the access of the front, so that's what the owners have said. Sorry, guys. Well, there's just two cars out here. Two cars out in the front need to be moved.
No, there is somebody left their lights on.
Oh, okay.
It's a Toyota van, and the number plate is BI77LP.
All right, those are the notices done.
Okay. So we'll just go on from that because Michael raised an interesting thing, looking at the ways that you can ingest cannabis. And the first is that, obviously if you smoke it or vape it, then it will enter the body a lot faster. And also it avoids what we call first-pass metabolism by the liver, which also means that slightly different cannabinoids are present. When you ingest cannabis, it first must go through the liver, and we're all familiar with THC, which is delta-9 THC, but then once it gets processed by the liver, it becomes, or some of it becomes, a product called delta-11 THC. And that actually has more sedative effects and possibly better pain relieving effects too. And that's why people will sometimes describe the stone of ingested cannabis as being a body stone. It's quite couch locking you, like that. And that's because partially some of it is delta-11 THC. The other ways that you can get cannabis into yourself is there are sublingual, which is under the tongue. Now, a little caveat to that is that if the effect doesn't come on within 10 or 15 minutes, then it's not sublingual. If the effect still takes an hour to an hour and a half to come on, you may have put it under your tongue, but it's actually still oral ingestion. If it's sublingual, it will start to take effect within 10 to 15 minutes. So that's a very simple way of checking as to whether a product really is sublingual or not. You can use it topically. It's quite well absorbed through the skin. There's a whole big, debate about shoving it up your bum as a suppository. Some people think it's great, some people think it's not. Hey, it's horses for courses. Some people think that you won't get stoned if you use a suppository. I can tell you that's wrong. You can. But we're not quite sure why. Some people say, don't get stoned, other people do. I suspect that there's a little plexus of blood vessels near your rectum, and if you just happen to hit it upon that, it will get absorbed quite well. Otherwise, it doesn't get absorbed very well at all because it's so close to the outside of the body. That's just my theory, but that sort of makes sense to me. So that's rectal administration. Have we left any out? Any other ways that we can get cannabis into ourselves? Yeah, I've said topical. Now, okay, so that leads me to a little bit about the cannabinoids themselves. Do any of you know what a cannabinoid molecule is, or does any of you know any of the science that's behind it? Or are everyone complete newbies? Yeah, looks to be. Okay, so the plant that we're interested in is called Cannabis sativa. That's just the general name. If we're talking about recreational or medical, it's best just to use the word cannabis. If we're talking about industrial or food, those sorts of things, then just use the word hemp. Then there's no confusion. Hemp is what we eat and use. Cannabis is what we have either medically or recreationally, and there's arguments to say that it's all the one anyway, but we won't get into that debate today. So we have this beautiful plant that can be either a male or a female, but it's only the females that produce the flower that produces all the THC and the other cannabinoids. So when you're looking up, things for seeds, it will say feminized, that the seeds are feminized. And that just means that it ensures that you have a female plant when it grows. So there's several ways you can grow cannabis, indoors, in greenhouses, and outdoors. And each way has their proponents. Theoretically, for medical cannabis, organic indoor cultivation will offer a greater degree of consistency and standardisation, which is sometimes useful. But outdoors offers all the benefits that come with real sunlight and real soil and stuff like that. So it's always going to be contentious, but as long as it's done organically and there's no chemicals involved, then I really don't think it matters too much. So we grow the plant and it gets these beautiful flowers. Well, we think they're beautiful. And if you look at them under a microscope, and I think Sister had a picture up there at first, and you could see the glistening little trichomes, all that cover the flower, and it's those trichomes that are the gland of the plant, and that's what produces the THC. A lot of people think it's the hairs, but it's actually not. It's these tiny little glistening glands that are all over it. And they are concentrated most in the flower. You still do get some in the leaf and all that sort of stuff, but nothing to the same extent. So here you are, you've got your mature cannabis plant. What are we going to do with it? Well, you have to harvest it for a start, if you want to use it dried. Now, we have a beautiful, fresh, in-flower cannabis plant. Some people like to juice. And they'll juice the buds, the whole plant. And in an ideal world, that's what we should be doing. If we're looking at true cannabis medicine, then we need to eat it as well. We need to eat the plant, we need to eat the seeds, we need to take the oil, as in the hemp seed oil. Because all of those things help activate our endocannabinoid system and make it really healthy. So that's the first thing you can do. Then you've dried your flower. What are we going to do with it? Okay, so the flower itself is very potent. It can have anywhere between 15 to 25% THC. I mean, it can have a lot more and a lot less than that. So before everyone jumps up and down, that's the average that you would get, for green market cannabis. Black market's a different thing. We won't go there. But yeah, for green market cannabis, you're looking at around, anything, 14 to 25% THC. Not a great deal of CBD in your normal strains, but there is some. Generally, it may be less than 1%, but it's definitely present, along with, well over 140 other different cannabinoids may be present as well. But THC is the biggie. That's the forerunner. That's the one that we really base how we describe the plant is really in terms of THC. So as Andrew said, you really either get high THC or low THC. And, that is correct, but perhaps not the most useful way of looking at it, because we're now learning that the minor cannabinoids can be just as important. And the most important of the minor cannabinoids is CBD. And everyone goes, oh no, but that's the really good one, rah, rah, rah. Hey, I agree with Andrew, it's still a minor cannabinoid. It's still only found in the plant in no more than 2% under natural circumstances. We now have strains that can push the CBD content up much higher, but technically in nature, you won't get it above about 2%. And that is why when we're talking about, CBD being the be-all and end-all, which some people do talk about, well, it's not really. It is a hugely important part of the plant because of the way it interacts with THC, and it has health benefits in its own right. It attaches to different receptors, and it does some different things. And so it's the sort of thing where it's been given a rap as being, the be-all and end-all, but it is just part of the plant. Now, have any of you heard when we talk about the entourage effect or plant synergy? Are those terms familiar to you? Okay, so basically when you're learning about botany and the active ingredients in plants, which are the phytochemicals, and this, when we have a planet full of healing herbs, by the way, cannabis is just one of the best. But what happens is that in the plant world, the phytochemicals in the plants work together to increase or maybe decrease certain effects. And it can actually be even greater than just an additive effect. So, 2 + 2 equaling 5 instead of 4. And we call this plant synergy. And it is a hugely important part of why natural medicine should be first-line treatment. Because the plant world knows what it's doing. And we've come along and interfered with that. So when we're looking at cannabis, it got termed something slightly different, and they called it the entourage effect, which means that no cannabinoid used in isolation will be as good as the whole plant product. And indeed, this is what all the research is showing, all of it, is that the whole plant is better than any sort of part of the plant. And I'll reinforce that a bit too, because this is the problem with pharmaceutics. I'll use aspirin as the example. Aspirin was derived from willow bark, salicylic acid, back in the late 19th century. And to make it easier to produce or whatever, they added an acetyl group to it. So it became acetyl salicylic acid, or aspirin. And as we know, it's a very effective anti-inflammatory and fever reducer, but it also causes, it has an anticoagulant effect and causes a bit of bleeding, and it can irritate the gut. Willow bark doesn't do that. Even though it contains the same things as what the aspirin does, the other ingredients of willow bark stop it from being an anticoagulant. So, by isolating the molecule and taking it out of the plant, they've basically fucked it. And this is what they've done to most of the plants that they've isolated the drugs from. You take the molecule out of the plant and you ruin it. And this is when you get adverse effects and higher levels of addiction when we come to opioids and stuff like that. So it's a really important thing to remember, is that that's what's happened in our quest for the magic bullet, the quick fix. We're all happy to throw these single molecule drugs down our throats to fix symptoms and sometimes cure disease, but not often, because we're all too impatient these days. We don't want to wait. We don't want to do the work. And I can tell you that if you follow natural medicine first and you commit to herbal medicine, including cannabis, it will work. But it takes time and it takes commitment. And so this is sort of also what we're up against when we're looking at, trying to get natural medicine back as frontline treatment. Okay, so what are we up to? We've got our dried flower. So what are we going to do with it? Well, we've already had far too long a discussion on smoking and vaping, so we'll leave that one aside. So we have to extract it somehow, don't we? We've got to get that THC out of there. So there's many, many ways that you can do it. All of them have their pros and their cons. You can simply put it into an oil and let the resin slowly be extracted into the oil. But it's very difficult to get a potent medicine doing it like that. You can use alcohol as a solvent. As there's many other ones that I wouldn't recommend, like isopropyl alcohol. You've got things like naphtha, acetone. You're starting to get into slightly more heavier chemicals there. Even though alcohol, is not free of problems, you're looking at what's better and what's worse rather than any absolutes. Probably the more common way people are using now would be alcohol and butane. And we're talking about small producers of medicine here. Butane is not the nastiest of solvents. Actually, it's probably, in a way, it's one of the better ones. It can be purged quite well, and the way I say it to people, look, you're probably getting more butane when you light a joint with a lighter than you are with ingesting butane, or what's left in after you've extracted it using butane. And that the advantage of that over alcohol is that it actually leaves the chlorophyll behind, so it's not green, it's brown, and that enables us to work out the dosage better because there's not as much other stuff in there. Does that make sense? So that's another way we can do it. And then you get into the fancier, more expensive methods like rosin presses, which are great if you can afford it, and supercritical CO2 extraction, which big companies use and stuff like that. And that itself actually raises a whole other heap of questions because in some of the studies they've done in Israel, they've actually had different results just with using different solvents. Like one that was extracted with alcohol had a better result than one that was extracted with butane, exactly the same, except the solvent was different. So there's that. And so then you've got your oil, and now what you have extracted at that point is a concentrate. And when we're talking about the butane extraction, I'll talk about that one because that sort of is what's filtered onto the streets a lot and whatever. And if you've ever heard the terms dab, shatter and wax, they are all street terms for the extract that we get when we extract with butane. And the BHO is another term you might come across, butane honey oil. And it's called that because of the beautiful yellow-brown colour it is when you hold it up to the light. So that is not activated, which brings us to the next thing. Okay, we've got our concentrate, which we know we can work out. I won't go into that today, but we can work out roughly how much THC is in it and blah, blah, blah. Oh, God, I forgot what I was going to say again. Thank you. Okay, but it's not activated. Okay, she's listening. So what do we want to do then? Do we want to activate it or not? So what we have in that extract, as in the plant, are the acid forms of the cannabinoids. So you will see written down like a little A and then THC or CBD or whatever the cannabinoid is. And that simply means that it's in the acid form in the plant. That's just a chemical term. Now, what happens with cannabis is that it needs to be heated to knock off a little molecular group off it so that it becomes activated. The little group that we're knocking off is called the carboxyl group because it's made of oxygen and carbon. And when we knock that off, we say that we have decarboxylated it. So now, if you've heard the term decarbed, now you know where it's come from. It's talking about knocking off the little carboxyl group off the acid cannabinoid to make it into the activated version, and it requires heat. However, just a word of caution, it is not just a function of heat, it is also a function of time. So, if you leave your cannabis, your acid THC medicine on a warm windowsill for a few weeks, it will decarboxylate. It will eventually convert to the active form. So that is why we tell you to keep it in the fridge. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's when we have to decide what we're going to do. Is it going to be activated or not? Now, the best health benefits come from activated cannabinoids. However, having said that, you still get massive health benefits simply from using non-activated forms like the acid forms. So if you so choose, you need never take a psychoactive cannabinoid and you will still receive many health benefits. But for many conditions, especially painful conditions, we do find that activated THC is the best for pain relief. And part of that is because it also helps with sleep. So it's sort of like a double thing. And as well as that, you have the CBD that's in there that will act as an anti-inflammatory and will act upon your immune system as well to help reduce the pain-causing chemicals like cytokines and stuff. So when you have an activated THC medicine, you'll get fairly, rapid pain relief within, a couple of hours, if you know well. But some of those effects will take longer-term things because it's still herbal medicine and it still takes months to really, really work. So even though you're getting good pain relief straight away, the other health benefits do take time, and that's why you persevere. And, if you've greened out and it's been a really unpleasant experience, just drop the dose and start taking it up again. But that's a whole other sort of area there too. And some people might just choose to use, for example, arthritis. That's a pretty common one. Some people might just choose to use a balm. And some people find just a balm is really helpful. Other people might just say, because of the driving, I'll just have CBD. Mind you, with traces of THC, you could still test positive anyway. Look, let's just face it, there's no way to get around it unless we get rid of those tests. So you have to make a decision, do I drive or not? And they may just try, and some people get good pain relief just with CBD, activated or not. So it really is horses for courses. And as has been reiterated by Michael and Andrew and now myself, it is safe to do so. The worst thing that's going to happen is greening out, where you may throw up, you may get so dizzy, anxious and paranoid that you have to lie down and you will go to sleep. And when you wake up, you might still feel a bit groggy, but you'll be incredibly hungry and you'll feel a hell of a lot better. Now, I don't know if there's any other overdose that can actually ultimately do you good. And it's really strange. All of it, I think, all of us that have been, we've all greened out. Especially if you have to test your own oil and stuff like that, believe you me, it's not hard to do. So we've all done that. And the interesting thing is that there's very few people that will look back on that and say, we'll never touch that again. Do you know what I mean? It's a sort of thing where, okay, it was really unpleasant while I was going through it. I know what's happened. Let's try and avoid that happening in future. And you just drop the dose and go, do it a little bit slower next time. But it's not something, one lad in particular who had to use medical cannabis from a teenager, and he certainly had a couple of unpleasant experiences. It was for epilepsy, but never would he have said, no, I'm not going to use that again, because the other benefits were just so great. So that's really the worst thing that can happen to you. It's never going to kill you. The LD50, which is how we measure the toxicity of a drug, which is how much of a substance it takes to kill half the mice. That's where they get the LD50 from, lethal dose 50. It basically, with cannabis, it's virtually immeasurable. People do put a number on it, but it's virtually immeasurable. A little bit of interesting bit of trivia. When they were trying to say, how dangerous it was and everything, they did this experiment where they reckoned that it caused brain damage and stuff, and they had all these mice and they just, they breathed in the smoke and they reckoned that it did all brain damage and killed them and did all this stuff. When you have a look at the way the study was set up, basically that's all the mice breathed in was smoke. They didn't give them any oxygen. It was just, and they wondered why they got brain damage, But this is the sort of research we're up against, guys. This is the sort of stuff that, especially the American government has put out there as fact. It doesn't really take much to uncover that it's all bullshit. But yeah. So we're up to whether we decarb or not to decarb. That is the question. Again, it's horses for courses. Again, it's all individualised. Again, if you overdose, you just drop the dose and start again at a bit lower and take it up a bit slower next time. The best advice that, we've always followed in medicine is start low and go slow. And you can't really go wrong. Now, we might, now that I've done a little bit of an intro to how you get from the plant to a medicine, do we have any other questions? Yes? You've got the mic.
I've got the mic.
Oh, you've been waiting a long time. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
We had to recover from the first one.
It was worth the wait. My name's Jeremiah O'Toole. I'm one of your cousins from Mullumbimby. The reason I'm here is two-part. One personal, the other one is I'm involved in a solar farm developing company at the moment, and we're looking at getting into doing this. So I'm trying to get a bit more of an education, which I think I've got more of an education listening to you than I have and everybody else I've spoken to. So I'd just quickly like to thank Michael, Andrew and Dr Deb. And you're deregistered at the moment?
Yeah.
Well, deregistered...
Now, let's just say non-registered.
Non-registered.
Technically, I was only deregistered for 1 week.
Okay, non-registered.
Yeah. Well, there is a difference.
A little comment. You non-registered or not, you're the best medical advice I've ever heard from any doctor anywhere. So thank you.
Thank you. That's why they got rid of me. It's actually quite flattering, actually, isn't it, really? I mean, if basically, if you're that much of a threat to ARPA and the medical board, is it such a bad thing?
One of the things that sort of led me into wanting to get into the development was last year I ran across 4 Parkinson's patients. 3 were helped by doctors, 1 by the Hemp Embassy, and the last guy was never going to leave home again. So it's obviously some miracles that are happening. So,
oh, definitely.
But my question is that is personal. I've got a couple of accident injuries. So chronic, what assistance can this give to chronic pain and or energy?
Okay. So we'll deal with the chronic pain part. Now, look, honestly, I think that if we had to pick just one condition that cannabis is just so suited for, it's chronic pain. The addictive potential of cannabis is in fact no greater than any other substance in the world that you can get addicted to, which is at the rate of about 9%. So yes, you will get people addicted to cannabis. But I sort of say, well, maybe they're the ones that, would be the type of addicts that would hit up Vegemite. So, yeah, so it's... and a lot of that addiction problem was created by the really bad weed that was around from the 1990s onwards that had no CBD in it, but that's